This is the Analog Gamers Podcast with your hosts.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Brent.
I'm Frank.
So today we're going to be talking about collectible games. In my experiences, the games that I'm most familiar with that are collectible card games. So Magic the Gathering, grew up playing Pokemon, have lots of students now ask me if I play Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I don't. I think Magic the Gathering is probably the most popular collectible game out there. They started 20, 30-ish years ago, and every collectible card game after at least kind of works on that archetype that Magic has put out. I think there are some great things about Magic. I think there are great things about collectible games, but I think there are also some downfalls to collectible games. Most notably, they can cost a lot of money if you really get into the collecting. So, Brent, what's your experience with collectible games?
So I also played, I played Pokemon when I was much younger. I have a Lord of the Rings starter pack that I never actually opened or did anything with except looked at the cards. And then for a very brief short period of time, I bought a couple Magic decks and learned how to play, and it was okay. Kind of enjoyed it, but I have a problem with the Magic card game, collectible card game style, because it's a lifestyle game and people have to continually put that money in there. So you can't, if you want to play it with people who are actually active players, you're either going to have to build a deck so full of ancient cards that they're going to cost you so much money to even be decent, or constantly play with new cards and never recycle some of your old cards. And there's not really a whole lot in between that I've seen in between those.
Yeah, so in collectible card games, you come in with a deck of cards that you've already constructed before you sit down at the table. So in a standard game of Magic, it's 60 cards in your deck. So if Brent and I sit down, we both bring our decks and we play the game. And as he said, Magic cards can go anywhere from costing you 10 cents to buy to thousands of dollars based on what the card and the condition of the card is.
So for our listeners' benefit, if they haven't played one, you talk about a pre-constructed deck.
Yes.
What does that mean, and how do you construct one?
So in a game like Magic, I'll use that as an example. You come in and there are cards that allow you to play other cards. So these are lands that produce mana. So basically just a way for you to pay the cost of other cards within the game. So the idea, right, is that you're a planeswalker traversing all these different planes, and you're meeting other planeswalkers and doing a battle wherever you are out in the multiverse. So you're battling another planeswalker, and so you can draw upon the power of the land to be casting spells, to cast creatures, to battle this other planeswalker. So when you sit down, each person has 20 life. You win the game by getting the other person to 0. There are other win conditions, but that's basically the basic way to win the game. 20 life, you get the other person to 0. And so you're playing spells that sometimes they stay on the board. You can play artifacts, which are, artifacts that stay on the board. You can play creatures to fight for you. You can enlist the help of other planeswalkers. So basically, right, the better the card is, the more expensive it gets to purchase.
So, back up, because you gave a great background, but didn't answer my question. So
Typical.
you buy a starter deck.
So you can buy a starter deck, or you can buy a bunch of individual cards that you build into a deck.
Or in between that is booster packs, right? That have...
Yep, so you buy booster packs, which have 15 randomly
Okay.
assorted cards. There'll be like 1 rare, 3 uncommons, and a bunch of common cards in it.
Okay, so
based on their rarity.
And then you take all these cards from whatever source,
Yep.
and you build a 60-card deck.
Yeah, based on, there's 5 different colors in Magic, so you want to make sure
So like
the
suits.
colors work together. Yeah.
So, and then if I understand it, rarity, the more rare a card is, there are classifications of rarity from common all the way to, what's the highest one?
I'm going to call it the
Magic.
wrong thing. Mythic. That's what
Mythic,
it is. Mythic
okay.
rares.
Okay, and those are generally literally less common as you move up to mythic rares, but also more powerful.
Typically, yes.
Yeah, it's a general rule.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Brent, you were on the verge of saying something.
So I haven't played either of these games long enough, but I know, Frank, you've played Hearthstone quite a bit. And
Yes.
I know your son Daniel played it even more.
And Shane does too.
Yep.
Okay, Shane. So it seems like a digital version of Magic. Where are the differences there? And where are the similarities, where are the differences in those two kind of games?
The biggest difference for me isn't necessarily gameplay, but the fact that through winning you can earn in-game currency to buy your cards. So you don't have to use, right, free to play, you don't have to use real money. Now you can, and a lot of people do. I don't.
Which is how they're making their millions.
Right. So you can buy cards and earn cards just through playing rather than having to spend money.
Actual cash. So literally Hearthstone is a digital version of a collectible card game. One of the other differences I find in it, so there are things that can happen because it's in a digital realm, and you have effectively, in the fact that it is a computer, the computer server that's running the game can act as a referee. And because of that, you can have things happen. Like you can have one of the types of cards. It's not a suit, it's a type. They're dragon types, and a lot of the cards related to that say if you're holding a dragon in your hand, your card has this additional effect. Well, the way they enforce that is by the referee, the system knows, yes, I do or I do not have a dragon in my hand, rather than having to rely on honesty to do that. And there are some other things like that where there are things that the players, it's not, because it's not perfect information, but the computer has perfect knowledge. It can do some things that you couldn't do in a CCG.
Right.
Because I have played both of them, if I remember right, and it's been a while, Hearthstone, though, isn't relying upon cards specifically to gain action points to be able to play more higher cards. It's based on the long length of the game, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, it's a perfect curve for each player. There's one class, Druid, where you can manipulate that curve more. But basically, the first turn you get 1 point to spend to play your card. Second turn you get 2, third turn 3, all the way up to 10. And then after turn 10, you just have those 10 to play. So yeah.
You've played both shades. How much does that affect the game?
It definitely evens out the game simply because in Magic, some of the most expensive cards are those cards that improve how quickly you can play the bigger cost cards.
So wait a minute.
So
real
different
quick.
lands, yeah.
It's the lands that determine normally how much you get to play out?
Typically, yes.
Okay,
typically.
go ahead. I've never played Magic.
And so if you can afford to buy the really, really expensive lands, you're automatically going to have a better deck because you can play the bigger cards quicker. Or, if you play all 5 colors and you got to make sure you're getting all 5 colors of your lands to be able to play those cards, well, there are cards that will go into your deck and actually fetch you lands out. They're called fetch lands to get the exact lands that you want. Now, for somebody like me, I can't afford those lands, right? So the cheapest ones are like $15. The most expensive ones are like 50. So, and I love playing Magic. I play it all the time with my friends, but there's a clear difference between like my friend Bradley, who has a $2,000 Magic deck, and me, who has a $30 Magic deck.
My entire game collection is like $4,000, and he's got $2,000 on 60 cards.
Well, this is one of the 100 card versions, so let's give him some credit there.
Okay.
And he gets the shiny foil one, so that adds some cost. But
man,
I
didn't spend $100 on Star Wars Rebellion.
So he has a deck that costs that much, and so when we play, it's really hard to be competitive for somebody like me who plays casually and doesn't spend a lot of money, simply because I can't afford those great cards. Right, when we play, his classic is like, there's a better card for that. He says that constantly when we play. I say, yeah, I know. So I think one of the huge pitfalls of collectible...
I have a house, what do you have?
Yeah, right. Especially collectible card games is if you don't have the money, it's really difficult to play.
This is why I don't like collectible card games, generally, because I'm not willing to invest that kind of money. One of the games I do like that I find very similar, it was published by White Wizard Games. It's called Epic, and it's actually a reconfigure of Epic collectible card game, because there was one that was a similar Magic type at one point. But what they did was they have a pack, and they have booster packs that are set packs as well, that exactly what comes in it, but that is the entire set of cards that you will play with. You can construct decks from that, you can draft from that, but everyone's going to play with these same cards. It also has the mechanism that every turn you get 1 gold to spend. every turn. That's all you're ever going to get, and all the cards cost either 1 gold or nothing. So there's no slow build up. There's no fast build up. It's from the start. You can play every card that's in your hand. It has a swingy nature because of some of that, but it allows you to play that same kind of mechanism as a collectible card game without having to spend the money. And I think that's a really cool reimagining of some of that collectible card game stuff.
So there's a fork in the road here in the conversation, and I want to go down both. So we're going to have to go down one at a time. What I'm hearing you describe, and I've played Epic once or twice with you, but it's been a while, is more along the lines of what's now referred to as a living card game model, which the booster packs in a collectible card game like Magic, the booster packs are a random set of cards, but they guarantee that you'll have one rare in each or something like that. In the living card game, and there are lots of these. There's ones for Game of Thrones. There's lots of them. They give you a set. The booster packs are a set, certain number of cards, and it's these exact cards. You know exactly what you're getting. But it also has a tendency to make the game not quite as open-ended, which is a good thing because it limits makes it so that you don't get $100 or $150 cards because they're just, if you want that card, you just go buy a booster pack with that card in it. You know what's in it, and you can do it. Those have become more popular exactly for the reason that for people who are casual players, like the gameplay style that a collectible card gamer has, but do not have the money to play competitively in the Magic world. And there are professional Magic players out there. That's what the living card game. There's probably professional living card game players too, but the money to get into it, the threshold is not as high.
Yeah, I think one way that I've played Magic with friends before that kind of levels the playing field, and nobody really loves doing this because you always want to play with your own deck, but, I have like 6 Commander decks, which Commander is just another variation of the standard Magic game. So I have like 6 of those, so we might sit down at the table and everybody plays one of those 6 decks because they're all pretty much evenly matched and evenly balanced. And so I've done that type of thing too, where everybody plays out of one person's collection because each person's collection is fairly balanced with itself. And so that way, everybody comes in and they know the rules, and it can kind of be much more evenly matched rather than just who spent the most money on cards is going to win. And not that that's always the case, right? Sometimes, the cheaper deck does win. But especially when if you're going to a card shop to play, I'm going to get annihilated every time because the guys that are going there are spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on their deck. Except one time when I had really crappy cards, and so everybody just ignored me. It was an 8-player game. Everybody ignored me, and then I won on a combination of cards because typically a combo is like 2 or 3 cards. Mine was like 7, so nobody really knew it was going to happen because all the cards were so crappy. And then I ended up winning that 8-player game because everybody just ignored me because I played with crappy cards. So that's kind of like a meta strategy going in here. You just have the worst cards, and everybody ignores you, and you might win.
So that is an interesting feature of collectible card games or living card games, Hearthstone, all of them, is that it's not so much that individual cards there are certain powerful individual cards, but beyond that, there are combinations that when I play this card, then I play this card. And both of those are interacting with cards that are already on the table. It produces this effect that's larger than the sum of the whole.
Right. And
the sum of its parts.
There's even what's called infinite combos, which, the combo literally can't end. So some of them produce an infinite amount of mana, right? So these points they use to play other cards. Some of them an infinite amount of dealing damage so that you can literally just kill everything on the table at the same time. Players tend to react fairly poorly when infinite combos happen.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about because in Hearthstone there's one that's notable where somehow you get, when you play a spell, it costs you nothing, and there's a minion, a character that you can play that every time you throw a spell you get a fireball, but a fireball is a spell. So if they don't cost anything to spell, you can throw a fireball for nothing and then get a fireball for throwing a spell and then play that one. And it just, the person will die because you have an endless capacity to throw
Right.
fireballs.
If you're a Hearthstone player, that's Sorcerer's Apprentice with Archmage Antonidas.
Wow.
So one of the interesting things about a computer game, though, is how long until that goes away, because they're able to change cards out on people.
They do,
So
yeah.
they do
They
that.
will force the meta to
They
change.
ruined a deck of mine like a month ago because it was Shane was talking about druid decks where you can manipulate the curve on the mana curve on how much you can play each turn, and they nerfed is a general term for people who haven't played this. That means they've reduced the power of a card or reduced something, and they took a card and nerfed it, and you can't do that in a physical collectible card game because there's no way you can remove all those. But in an online game, you just rewrite the
You just
card,
change the card,
and
yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, with Magic, it can definitely get sticky because Wizards will, right, they'll like put out a ban list and then a restricted list, and there's also a different ban list for all the different formats of playing cards.
Wizards being the publisher of the game.
Yes.
So for those people who got lost there.
Not real Wizards. I mean, they might be, I'm not sure. But
Certainly they are marketing wizards.
yeah, those
They've made a lot of money.
the publishers and administrators of the game.
So let's talk about, let's go down two paths real quick. One is the
You're all
history
about
of
these
these
paths
games.
today.
Well, so one of the problems with these CCGs that we've already talked about is they get expensive. Part of the reason they get expensive is because there's what's referred to as power creep in these games. The cards, the newest generation of cards, is just ever so slightly more powerful than the previous generation of cards. And when you've got something like Magic that's been going on for it's coming up on 30 years. I don't know what the exact publication date was, but it was late 80s, early 90s that this game came out. It's gotten to the point where not all of them, but a lot of those earlier cards you will not see in competitive play because they don't keep up. That's an advantage of Hearthstone, an online game, where when they start to see that happening, when there's an overly powerful card, they can nerf it.
Right.
It also is a great marketing gimmick, right? Because it forces people if they want to stay current. So I'll take a moment here and give a parental viewpoint on this. If your kids really want to play Magic and they're younger, to the point where they're not going to be playing competitively because they're just not mature enough to do that. There's a couple solutions. One is the living card game model. The other thing that I've heard several people talk about is go buy one of two things. Either there are people who will sell through eBay their Magic cards from 15 years ago, and they'll sell 1,000 of them, and you'll spend $20 for 1,000 cards, and you give them to your kids, and you say, "Here, these are the only cards you can use," and they will have fun. And within that closed system, they will play games that are competitive amongst themselves. Similarly, there are people so historically, Magic the Gathering is seen as the granddaddy of these kinds of games.
Right.
It's not the first.
Yeah.
There was one before it that I know of, and there may have been others, called Netrunner. It has since been republished as Android Netrunner, but the original Netrunner did not do particularly well, and it died. There are a lot of CCGs out there that died. There's a Star Wars CCG that died. There's a Middle Earth CCG that died.
I have both of those.
And so what happens with that is then you have a closed system because they're no longer publishing cards for those.
Right.
And that allows you to potentially, in some of these cases, I'm pretty sure that the original Netrunner, not the modern version, which is an open game and active and very good, but the original Netrunner you can get for a real reasonable price and play it. And that one, the concept of that one is a little bit different in terms of you're not planeswalkers. It's 2-player only. One person's if you think of the movie Tron, it's Tron. One guy is trying to get in and disrupt the corporation, Big C, and the other player is the corporation trying to stop that, is the premise behind the game. That's the premise behind the new version too, but I don't want people to mistake the new version for the old version.
Some of my favorite memes I've seen on the internet say like, keep your kids off drugs, get them hooked on Magic.
Yeah.
Because they won't have money.
Yeah, they won't have money for drugs.
But another way, if you want to play somewhat of a closed system within Magic, is Wizards of the Coast does put out pre-constructed decks. And occasionally they even do dual decks, which is where you buy 2 decks together. and they're perfectly balanced. They play test them a bunch, perfectly balanced against each other. So buying a set of those 2 dual decks, or buying, 2 different sets of them, gives you 4 balanced decks to play against each other. And I think those run probably about $30 for the 2 decks, which $30 for a 2-player game is kind of market price.
So and that keeps you from getting down the rabbit hole of cost.
Yeah, I often joke with my wife that, if somebody broke into our house, don't break into my house. If somebody broke into our house, would they know that this little cardboard box with Magic cards is the most valuable thing in the house? Partly because there's really nothing valuable in the house, and partly because, Magic cards are expensive.
So I think while they cost a whole bunch, I think Magic has opened up a lot of really cool mechanisms to more general populace than would play regular board games.
He read my mind. That was the other path.
So because I mean, just if you talk to Magic players, almost all of them who have played Magic for any amount of time have played a draft where they've taken some amount of cards and then they've chosen those cards in some random or selected fashion. That we see in several different board games when we're playing it.
Right.
But you can come into that board game with anybody who's played Magic and say, we're going to draft these and here's your set. And they're going to understand at least a base level of how to do that.
So let's define this real quick. And I'll define it and you guys can tell me where I'm going wrong. So my understanding of a Magic game that has drafting, and this is a way to play competitively and make sure that it tries to even out the game, and that is you have a bunch of booster packs.
So each player typically gets 3 booster packs.
Okay, and they tear them open, and they pick one card and pass it to the left or the right.
Yeah.
And then that way everybody's pulling out of the same pool of cards, one card at a time.
Yeah. So you would open one pack, pick a card, pass that pack, and you would keep passing those hands until there's only one card left. You pass that card off, and then everybody has 15 cards. And then you open the second pack, do the same thing, open the third pack.
Okay. So I think what Brent's alluding to here is there are games actually that now use that as a main mechanism that are not collectible games. There's also this idea of I get to choose what cards go in my hand. That is drafting. One of the versions of that is also deck building, where the entire game is about building a hand of cards. And so there's some bleed over between drafting and deck building.
Yeah, so drafting, we're talking about games like Sushi Go, Seven Wonders, where those are also set building, but drafting is the main mechanic.
Right.
And then deck building would be like a Dominion, a Legendary, games like that.
Right. Now, there are also games that have expanded the collectible beyond cards. There are collectible dice games. Quarriors is the one that comes to mind. I don't even know if it's in print anymore. I have not played a collectible dice game. Has anybody else?
No, but to ask the obvious stupid question, the individual dice themselves have collectible value to them?
Yes. I don't know if you come with dice like a pre-built bag of dice, or if you're drafting dice out of the middle, more like Dominion style. But
interesting.
The only dice I've heard of having value are weighted dice, so that you win a lot more.
Yeah. So sometimes that value comes in lead at the end of the game. But the other ones are, and these are collectible, but in a different kind of way. If you look on Board Game Geek or a number of other gaming sites, you'll see them listed together with like Magic the Gathering as a collectible game. But they're a little bit different. And the one I have that immediately comes to mind, actually my son has, is Wings of War, now known as Wings of Glory, where it is a World War I aerial combat game with miniature aircraft, and you can buy. Well, you don't have to have the miniature aircraft. You can just play it with cards that come with it. But they have booster packs of cards for aircraft with different flight envelopes, mainly, or different weapons. And you can also get those same planes in the miniature form. So it's not that I'm now going to buy, I might be buying a more powerful plane. It's still limited in that they're historical. So I might, if I take my Fokker DR7 against your
what the heck is that?
Sop with Snipe, I'm probably going to win because the Fokker DR7 is a better plane. But
Oh,
that's
yes.
not the but that's not the purpose of buying the aircraft. Is not to build a better airplane to better win, as it would be in a Magic the Gathering, where I'm actually trying to get a better selection of cards for the play out to win.
Yeah.
That's why I went into that.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of familiarity with, miniature collectibles or dice collectibles. Again, most of my experiences with Magic, but as Brent said, I also have some like random Lord of the Rings cards, and then something I do collect. I don't play much anymore because hardly anybody does. Frankie mentioned this was the Star Wars collectible card game. I actually do collect those. Again, don't play very much because nobody plays it with me. But I thought of something else, kind of a closed system that you can play collectible card games. Especially in Magic, there's something called a cube, which is just a set of cards, a lot of the times commons, that somebody will put together. So it's just like a box of maybe 5,000 common cards, and then you do a draft out of that cube. And then you form your deck out of just that close set of cards, and then you play everybody at the table
Okay.
with that. So like my brother does a cube, and my friend Tyler has a cube as well. So that's another kind of closed system. And like you said, go on eBay and buy a bunch of cards. You can kind of form that, pretty easily, 10, 15 bucks with that type of system.
So none of us, Shane, you play probably more collectibles than Brent and I do.
Yes.
So Brent, what keeps you from playing collectible card games? We're getting close to the end here, so I'm trying to start bringing it to a close.
Like I said before, price. I'm not willing to pay that price. I love the gameplay. I love that idea of the skirmish between players and the powerful cards versus the non-powerful cards and all that, but I'm not willing to pay the money out to be a collector of that. I'd rather spend my money elsewhere.
So you have not tried living card games, which would help with that?
So I mean I have. I've played
Epic.
I've played Star Realms is a similar but a deck builder rather than a pre-constructed deck. But it's still that I don't consider that a collectible because you're not going to go out and find this collection community around that. So
yeah, I see your point.
While I love that they have the same mechanics and they can do similar things, it's not the same in my mind because of that.
So what keeps me out of them is part of it's the money, but living card games. So Daniel, my son, and I split Lord of the Rings, the living card game, or the card game. It is a living card game. And I pretty much said, Daniel, it's all yours. And the reason is because I don't have the time to construct decks. And correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the enjoyment of playing Magic is not just the gameplay, but you get the fun of constructing decks. So
for me, definitely, some people will just look up a deck list and make it because they don't enjoy that. But
okay,
part of me would almost rather just construct decks than play with them at times.
I don't have time for that, which is why the only collectible card game I play is the online Hearthstone, because it literally is drag and drop your deck. And so you can build a deck. If you decide you want a new deck, you can build it in seconds rather than going through all kinds of cards. Right. And so that's the only one I'll play because I don't have the time to construct decks. That's a big part of it for me. So that's the other thing.
Yeah, so if you're wondering if collectible games, card games, miniature games are for you, I think it really comes down to two things. One, do you have a community to play this with? Because, right, if you're going to spend the time and money that collectible games take, you want to make sure that you're actually playing on a consistent basis. Right, with board games, I can spend $20 on a board game, and if I only play it once a year, for me that's okay because we're playing other games and all that kind of stuff.
And if four people play $20, that's $5 a head. That's even in one play.
To spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on cards that I'm never going to use, it's a little more difficult to justify that to myself. The other way I think that to get into collectible games is if you look at your collection and you own every board game you want and still have thousands of dollars sitting around that you have nothing to do with, then I think collectible games are for you. But yeah, so you know what? If you're already on the scene, keep playing. I think they're fabulous games. I wouldn't suggest it for the casual gamer simply because it's going to be a cost and time investment that may not be worth it. But as we said, check out some of those drafting games. Check out some of those deck building games that we mentioned, and really see if you like those kind of games. And if you do, maybe getting into a closed system of playing a cube of Magic or some pre-constructed decks might be for you. And as always, play games and don't do drugs.
This is Frank with a quick programming note before we go. First of all, we'd like to thank you for listening to the podcast. Hopefully you have had as much fun listening to us as we have had producing it. Secondly, I wanted to remind everyone that we are approaching the end of our first season. In fact, the last episode will drop the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. After that, we will take the month of December off and then come back to you at the beginning of the new year. Thanks again. This has been the Analog Gamers Podcast. You can find us at theanaloggamers.libsyn.com. You can email us at theanaloggamers@gmail.com or find us on Facebook as The Analog Gamers. The Analog Gamers Podcast is licensed under Attribution, No Commercial, Non-Derivative, Creative Commons 3.0 license.